All right, welcome to State of Play on Mint Press News. My name is Greg Stoker. We're going to jump right in. Got a lot of stuff to cover. We'll try to make room for the live Q&A at the end of the session. We took a week off last week, and a lot happened over the past 10 days, most notably the reemergence of the 2005 Marine Corps Massacre in the Iraqi village of Haditha. Israel's invasion of the West Bank also commenced, aptly named Operation Summer Camps, because they're really not even trying to hide it anymore. So the impunity and the lack of accountability of the United States and its allies then, in 2005, and now is simply an expression and a function of imperialism. Does law apply if you control the global legal institutions? So let's just add this up here for a second. Will justice ever be granted to the Iraqis or the Palestinians? Well, to discuss this question, we will be joined later by former U.S. Marine Corps Judge Advocate General, JAG lawyer, Haytham Faraj, who was intimately involved in the Haditha investigation and cover-up. He wrote a book about it called No Time for Truth. I think we'll eventually link it below in the description, and now advocates for Palestine. The main thrust of the interview will center on the possibility or impossibility of war crimes prosecution in the future now that the Haditha massacre has re-entered the public sphere, how these atrocities are covered up institutionally, and what this means for war criminals today involved in the Gaza action. It seems the U.S. and Israel able to investigate themselves and find nothing wrong. So not to editorialize, but the possibility of justice does seem bleak. So join us tonight for a bracing conversation. But first, here is our Patreon plug, and it goes something like this. Mint Press News is a completely independent news room, small boutique kind of setup we got over here. No corporate sponsors, no ad revenue because we're demonetized on everything. So if you want to support this channel and this platform, you can go on Patreon, shuck $5 a month. Really helps. If you don't want to do that, just liking and sharing and commenting on the live really helps. So we appreciate y'all. We're just glad you're here. What else? I think that's good enough for the plug. All right. So there is no better case study for why empire is bad for us than the Iraq War. I think this is actually this is not Iraq for some reason. This is Afghanistan. That's way too green and mount. Okay. So anyways, we'll just still worry about that. Afghanistan's also a great reason why empire is bad for everybody. So it still works. And, you know, the people of West Asia know it. The Iraq War saw an overthrow of a stabilizing government. And say what you want about Saddam, he kept sectarian and regional violence in check and created a war-torn power vacuum that killed over 1 million people and directly contributed to the rise of the Islamic State, which really has nothing to do with Islam at all. Plenty of Americans died too, or remained, took their own lives from a combination of PTSD and knowing it was all for a lie. So also, trillions of dollars were washed out of the public sector tax base and into the private through defense contracts to the military industrial complex, all under the cover of a complicit media and academic complex bent on manufacturing consent for this live war. There were no WMDs in Iraq. There was no Al-Qaeda presence in Iraq until after we arrived. And that's why we say, like, we did bin Laden the biggest favor by invading Iraq, because we did for him what he could never do for himself, is raise that kind of level of recruitment and get so many people on board after we invaded a country without a justifiable casus belli. So, and this is something we take for granted, that it was literally, again, for a lie, natural resources, imperialism, late stage finance, capitalism, name it, call it whatever you want. And I don't think most Americans have grasped what we did in Iraq, one of the oldest civilizations in the world, in order to bring freedom and spread democracy through full spectrum dominance. So there are two incidents that bring the rank and justice of that war into the light in an age before social media could live stream a genocide in Palestine. That's Abu Ghraib, the U.S.-run torture prison outside of Baghdad, and the infamous Haditha massacre of 24 civilians by U.S. Marines in Iraq in 2005. A salient difference between these two crimes was that the Haditha massacre lacked photos in the public sphere. A report by the New Yorker published last week, August 27th, kind of has changed all that. It's now back in the public discourse, kind of, but we think it's going to disappear. It's still important for what's going on currently in Gaza, though. But in an oral history from the Marine Corps in 2014, General Michael Hagee, who was the commandant of the Marine Corps at the time of the Haditha killings, bragged about keeping the Haditha photos secret. Quote, "The press never got them, unlike Abu Ghraib." So his interviewer, Fred Allison, a Marine Corps historian, interjected, though, the pictures, they got the pictures. That was what was so bad about Abu Ghraib. Yes, Hagee agrees. And I learned a lot from that. Those pictures today have still not been seen. And so I'm quite proud of that. Unquote. There was a cover-up. No one went to jail. And we're going to talk to a lawyer who was part of that and witnessed the cover-up firsthand in a couple minutes. And it was just kind of put in the dustbin of history until now. So you've seen that the New Yorker and Madeline Barron at the In the Dark podcast sued for the pictures, finally got them under the Freedom of Information Act. But this story has broken at an inopportune time for the U.S. war machine within the context of the ongoing genocide in Palestine, which is the U.S. is completely instrumental in facilitating. And at the DNC a couple of weeks ago, Kamala Harris pledged that the U.S. would continue to have the most lethal fighting force on the planet. But I hope people are getting really sick of it. The lies, the cover-ups, the dead innocents, the useless forever wars. And nothing has changed since then, right? Nothing's really changed since 2005. The Islamophobia hasn't changed. U.S. hawkishness and belligerent foreign policy hasn't changed. The talking points that justify war and interventionism in the Middle East have not changed since 2005 when this massacre happened. So what were the basic points of the Haditha massacre? Well, this was after like the Battle of Fallujah, and a Marine convoy, a squad, was driving around, gets hit with an IED. They take a Moscow. 3 Marines are wounded, 1 dies, and some of the guys, it seems like the squad leader lost control of his squad, and some of the Joes started executing people. 24 people in different locations. We'll talk about some of those. We're not going to get too bogged down into the details. You can listen to the In the Dark podcast that just came out with the companion piece in the New Yorker if you want like all the details, or you could read Haytham's book. But for our purposes, we're talking about international law and what the war in Gaza has done and how this is echoed in the 2005 Haditha massacre. So they killed 24 people, took pictures, marked their bodies, and nobody was ever charged. And so this is a report from Al Jazeera after everybody was exonerated.
U.S. military prosecutors called the court-martial of Marine Staff Sergeant Frank Wuterich the last chance for justice in the mass killing of 24 Iraqis in the town of Haditha in 2005. But on Monday, Wuterich, who was charged with manslaughter, pleaded guilty to negligent dereliction of duty. Now he faces a maximum of 3 months in prison and a rank demotion. A military statement says Staff Sergeant Wuterich accepted responsibility for his actions and will now be held accountable for those actions. Wuterich had ordered his unit to shoot the civilians after a roadside bomb killed a member of their convoy. The victims included women, children, and an elderly man in a wheelchair. Prosecutors said Wuterich was ultimately responsible for his team's behavior. Prosecutors dropped charges against 6 of the Marines, while the 7th was found not guilty of trying to erase photographic evidence from a laptop. Afterwards, the massacre was hushed up for months. The revelations further damaged the U.S.'s reputation among ordinary Iraqis and boosted anti-war sentiment in the U.S. With Wuterich's plea deal, legal experts say the criminal case is done.
The current administration has taken the position we're going to look forward, not backwards. And as I said, accountability should be top down, not bottom up.
The doctor who identified the bodies of the victims in 2005 told Al Jazeera that justice has not been done. Wuterich will be sentenced on Tuesday. After so much time, the final chapter of the Haditha massacre is coming to a close in the U.S., but not in Iraq, where the news that no one is facing any significant prison time for 24 deaths will certainly aggravate the already strained relationship between the two countries.
So basically, we're going to talk about how this verdict was engineered. So it wasn't a cover-up in the traditional sense. It was engineered so that nobody would be prosecuted. Because it seems like Scott Wuterich didn't actually kill anybody. He just lost control of his squad, and we're going to deal with some of the misconceptions. But all the squad mates who actually did were given immunity, and everyone wanted to pin it on him because he was in the leadership position. But also, if you follow the Scott Peterson trial, the Innocence Project just took on Scott Peterson's case, and he was also really bad on camera. So he just looks guilty AF. So here's a cutting from a 60 Minutes interview that he did back in the early aughts.
Interview on 60 Minutes in 2007. Wuterich told us the Marines rolled grenades into rooms when they heard rustling behind the doors.
Did you step in the room?
I did glance in that room.
What did you see?
It was, bodies.
The bodies that you saw, can you describe them?
Initially, I can't initially. I remember there may have been women in there. May have been children in there.
And you recognize that?
I did.
As the squad leader, is it your responsibility at that point to say, cease fire? Let's not take another step. We just killed some women and children here.
My responsibility as a squad leader is to make sure that none of the rest of my guys died or got killed. And at that point, we were still on the assault. So no, I don't believe so.
Yeah, so that interview did not go well at all. And of course, no one did any jail time about this. So we're going to kind of examine this and look at it in the context of what's going on in Gaza. Also, Cell 8 in the comments, the YouTube comments section, love your Imperial Guard thumbnail. That's awesome. All right, so yes, the Haditha massacre, completely unsatisfactory. And it just really goes to show that there's one set of rules for one set of people and one set of rules for other sets of people. Yeah. So someone's asking, still on the assault, little kids laying dead with numbers written on their backs. Yeah, look, they weren't really taking fire. So I wouldn't really say that they were in a mount or assault situation. So yes, for the Emperor inside joke. We're just going to go ahead and roll the interview and get into it. So I think it's a heater. All right, cheers. So again, tonight on State of Play, we will discuss the possibility or impossibility of a war crimes prosecution in the future now that the Haditha massacre has re-entered the public sphere, how these types of atrocities are institutionally covered up, and what it means for war criminals today involved in the Gaza action. It seems that the U.S. and Israel are able to investigate themselves and find they did nothing wrong. Not to editorialize, but the possibility of justice does seem bleak at this moment. So to that end, we are joined by Haytham Faraj, a retired Marine Corps infantry officer and military lawyer, JAG, Judge Advocate General. He began his Marine Corps career as an enlisted infantry Marine and later became an infantry officer. He has held positions as a platoon leader, company commander, operations officer for a special operations unit. A few years before retirement, he attained a law degree and became a JAG officer and was assigned as senior defense counsel to Camp Pendleton in California. Haytham was intimately involved in the war crimes case that came to be known as the Haditha massacre, and his work revealed a cover-up at the highest levels of command that resulted in the Marines responsible for the gruesome murders of 24 civilians to go free. He co-authored a book about the case and cover-up entitled No Time for the Truth, which we will link in the description if you guys want to check it out. He now has his own law firm with offices in LA and Chicago and represents ordinary people against large corporations, insurance companies, and governmental agencies at all levels of government. He was also foreign area officer for Middle East and North Africa with specialized knowledge of operational law and international humanitarian law. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. So it's been about almost 20 years since a squad of Marines executed 24 civilians in a streak of revenge killings, marked them, numbered them, apparently kept the photographs as some sort of digital trophy. No one went to jail. The Iraqi families are still seeking justice. We're seeing the same thing happen in Gaza and West Bank on a larger scale. So the law of land warfare seems to be something that only applies to African warlords, and Putin, as the chief prosecutor of the ICC, said a senior Western official told him before he put in the request for Netanyahu's arrest warrants. But starting with the Haditha massacre, how was a cover-up of that even allowed to happen? It's just so blazingly an inexcusable war crime. They took an IED, took a mass casualty event, but they weren't in enemy contact. And it was just really a clear-cut case.
Yeah, let me clarify something that you said, because I think it would be unfair to the person that tried to bring the story to life. The reason that the photos were taken is because a Marine that was not a member of the squad came upon the numerous civilians and decided to document what happened, because he thought someone should investigate. And I forget the young man's name. He was a lance corporal. He has severe PTSD. He took the photos so that because he thought someone at some level of command should investigate what happened. Okay. And he went to turn the photos over, and they basically said, delete them. And when the story broke in Time magazine, the government finally felt compelled to investigate. They went back and began to ask who has photos. And this young Marine said, I have photos. And that's why you have the story of the Haditha massacre. Otherwise, the story that came out in the press was there was an IED, the Marines took fire, and then terrorists killed and blew up all 24 people. That it wasn't the Marine. That was the official statement from the Marine Corps. And so you could see by the photos that have just been revealed, you could clearly see that they weren't blown up. These were well-placed shots in the foreheads of babies. and women and some men, some kneeling, some in positions that were clearly not threatening. And the Iraqis that saw this initially, that responded, were absolutely infuriated that the Marine Corps tried to sweep this under the rug by saying these were terrorists that killed the civilians. Then finally, when the story broke in Time magazine and the photos came out, it became clear that this was a war crime. So I say that just to correct the record, because I think it'd be unfair to a Marine who I think is a hero, rather than someone who participated in an attempted cover-up.
No, understood. Thanks for the clarification. Again, some of the details around that are still very murky. The marking of the bodies, it does seem from an outsider perspective like that was some sort of trophy taking, and I've never heard of any BDA SOP that where that happens. But so going forward,
he didn't mark the bodies,
right.
Greg.
Right.
The bodies were marked by the squad. It wasn't trophy taking. It was to supposedly account for the number of dead.
Okay.
And there was no other way to do it. It's not to excuse it. We're going to get into the cover-up.
Okay. So what I find interesting about the Marine Corps' official statement is it seems institutionally that's what happens every time, especially in wars like this. We're seeing parallels in what's happening in Gaza. The civilians were not killed by the IDF; they were killed by Hamas after the action, or whatever talking point they go with.
Yeah, we saw it. I think it was the Baptist hospital bombing, where you and I know that the fuses on the rockets or the bombs being dropped, and this was do you remember the incident I'm talking about where something like 300 or 400 people died?
Yes, it was the first of the hospital bombings that
right.
They put a lot of.
I forget the name of the hospital.
Yeah, well, they put a lot of information operations into it to excuse it, as I recall.
Well, they said it was Hamas, that Hamas misfired a rocket and killed all these people. But you can tell that this was a fuse sensitive explosion that blew up above the ground, and that's why you had such a massive. Why it was so destructive, and there was no crater, right? And I don't know if you recall, it was so long ago, and I could tell that this was something that the Israelis had dropped, but the story got swept under the rug by, it's just Hamas, and of course our press is just willing to go with any story that the Israelis put out.
So the more things change, the more they stay the same. We're seeing the same kind of talking points. So when Time magazine broke the story, the Marine Corps was forced to reverse its initial statement and then work furiously to do damage control. And I was just wondering what that process looked like.
I was on the inside. I was actually one of the defense lawyers. I was working another war crimes case, and I was assigned Frank Wuterich. And what was unbelievable to me throughout is Frank Wuterich's so-called inability to remember anything. He was adamant that he didn't participate. After months and months, I came to believe that he did not participate in the actual killing, but he certainly lost control of the squad. He certainly didn't control the squad. What those photos revealed, and this is what broke the case, is a tiny 9mm shell. And it's in the edge of one of the photos. You can barely see it, but if to a trained eye, you can tell that wasn't 5.56, it was 9mm. And we knew only 2 people had 9mm
in the squad
that were on the scene that day. Only one in the squad, and it was the machine gunner. And the other 9mm was with the lieutenant who showed up later after the killings had occurred, but he was in the area. So we know the lieutenant hadn't shot anything, and so it left one person, the machine gunner, Lance Corporal Tatum. And then that connected with a piece of the story where Tatum, the lieutenant, testified that Tatum came to him sometime later and said, "Can I have your magazines?" And he was talking about the 9mm magazines. And so that put one person in the room. the firing room, the killing room, and House 2, which is the most gory photos that were released last week. Along with that, you had another Marine that said, I was also in the room. And that was a then PFC Mendoza, who also placed himself inside the room. Ultimately, NCIS came to the conclusion that there had to be two shooters, again, based on the forensic analysis of the photos. There was nothing else except those photos. Mm-hmm. That there were two shooters in the bedroom of House 2, which is where most of the killings and the most gory killings took place, right? The well-placed shots to head to babies laying in a bed. The others were terrible, but those tended to be more about grenades or long distance shots that targeted men. This was up close, within, a foot or two of someone aiming a rifle or aiming a pistol, looking in a child's eyes and pulling a trigger. And so that's how it kind of began to be built. And then they worked backwards and forwards. Ultimately, I came to the conclusion that Woodrich was not the shooter. And this is where it gets really strange. The government gave immunity to everyone else but Woodrich, the least culpable, arguably, right? Mm-hmm. And so now, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but it becomes an easy case to try, because the shooters who placed themselves in the room have been given complete immunity from prosecution. It wasn't until later, really in trial, that we realized that this was really a cover-up. And the people that I think best describe the cover-up are two NCIS agents by the name of Brady and Maloney, Mike Brady, and I forget Maloney's first name. They ultimately resigned from NCIS over the government's decision-making because in the course of their forensic analysis of the scene and what they discovered and what they could prove scientifically, they could conclusively say who the shooters were. Mm-hmm. And the closer they got to that, the more the government, the prosecutors, ordered them to stop their work. And at some point, they pulled all funding from NCIS and said, you're not allowed to finish this forensic investigation. I mean, imagine that. Mm-hmm. And the forensic investigation pointed to the Marines that deliberately pulled the trigger to kill innocent civilians.
And that was specifically focused on House 2, because I know that there was seemingly some like extrajudicial killings outside of a white car near the scene and some other places as well.
That was just that was infuriating, to say the least. Mm-hmm. The person that was responsible for all those shootings was a guy by the name of Dela Cruz. Okay. Mm-hmm. Dela Cruz is a pathological liar. He lied throughout. He would say one thing and then another thing. In trial, Dela Cruz admitted to shooting those men. They were students. They were students going to college, I think, if I remember right. They just happened to be driving all in one day. But of course, like I don't know if you have experience. I know you have experience in Afghanistan, but in Iraq, we use the term MAM, a military-aged male.
Yeah, same.
It seemed like everyone who was a male and not 60 became a potential terrorist as far as the U.S. military was concerned, right?
Yes.
You assume that they're bad until they prove otherwise. And so you had four young men in a car, and Dela Cruz opened up. He shot at the car. He orders them out of the car. I don't know if those photos were released. I think they were. And he basically has them kneel down and executes them one by one. And Jim Mattis at the time, later Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, decided to give that guy immunity. I hope you know what immunity is. Immunity means that you are safe from prosecution. And so then they went on to prosecute Woodrich for it, but no one was going to convict Woodridge of that, for example, because Dela Cruz had already admitted that he was the shooter. So it isn't a cover up in the sense of we're not going to do anything. It's a cover up in the sense of you have competent people doing what you think lawyers are supposed to do, but they're making such terrible decisions that you realize this is not incompetence. This is deliberate.
Yeah. So they basically engineered a situation where, they could give someone a slap on the wrist and excuse the rest of the other Marines because
because Woodridge, Woodridge in the end, Frank Woodridge, he loses control of the squad. What is that called? Dereliction of duty. It's a driving ticket. It's a speeding ticket in the military.
Mm-hmm.
A dereliction of duty event. It's not something that is otherwise subject to a court martial. And so 3 weeks into the trial, they dropped the charges because there is nothing to get him on. Because all the bad guys, all the guys that had committed the crimes had been given immunity. It wasn't even a slap on the wrist. They got letters from Mattis saying, I am proud of your conduct, or words to that effect, and I want you to know that I support you, and blah blah blah, and they went on to their either civilian lives or continued in the Marine Corps.
Well, and I mean, it didn't help that it didn't look like Woodridge played well on camera. I don't know. You probably recall the 60 Minutes interview he did.
Well, I wasn't there. I was that interview was orchestrated by then a civilian lawyer who's a former JAG. He was my co-defense counsel at the time. But no, he did terribly, and I had a big fight with my co-counsel about the decision making of putting him on 60 Minutes. In the end, it ended up helping Woodridge because he always denied it. He always denied any involvement in the shooting in any of the rooms, except the first house when they entered. And of course, they dropped the charges on that because they being the Marine Corps, chalked it up to combat actions. The Marines said we took fire from that house and we went in with grenades and mount type situation. Mm-hmm. And so that was sort of just ignored.
Did they take fire from the house?
No. Look, they took fire. If we accept the statements at face value, mm-hmm. There was some shooting from the direction of the houses. But when if I don't know if you've heard the podcast, the Marines referred to it as House 1, House 2, House 3, and House 4. Mm-hmm. But there were probably 50 houses in the area. The occupants of those houses happened to be the unlucky ones that that the Marines oriented on after they heard some firing from the south, right? Mm-hmm. So the IED happens, they take up a defensive position, they're waiting for the medevac to arrive, and then they hear some firing, and some Marines report some shots landing from the south. And so the lieutenant shows up on the scene and he says, clear south. But clear south really means nothing in this situation because we don't have an enemy. We don't have the rules of engagement require that they identify the enemy before they start engaging. Otherwise, it's a knock and talk, if you're familiar with those types of operations, because we don't have a specific enemy. It's not mount. And so the Marines hear clear south and they go on a rampage. And the people that died were the unlucky people that occupied the houses that the Marines encountered first. But there wasn't firing from those houses.
Yeah. So now that it's 20 years later, and it doesn't seem well. Now that these photographs have finally been released, do you see anything happening with this case, or is it just another sad testament to U.S. interventionism?
No. Look, I and a gentleman by the name of Mike Epstein, Mike more than me, he's a filmmaker who followed this case from its early days until the end. He has put out a podcast, if you've heard about it, Murder in House 2. He put out a film on it. No one, it won the Tribeca. It won one of the awards at the Tribeca Film Festival, but no one would buy it. No one was interested in it. In the end, who cares about, and I say this facetiously, who cares about a bunch of Iraqis that died 20 years ago? It's just, there's no interest. Mike has almost bankrupted himself trying to get the story out. And there's zero interest by anyone in Western media. Just, the release of these photos, I don't think it's just another story that you and I are discussing, but I don't think the American public is very interested in these types of stories anymore. They've moved on.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there seems to be a mass amnesia about the GWAT. Just like 20 years down the tube, don't really want to think about it. But there is an ongoing, I wouldn't call it a war, in Palestine right now, where we're seeing these same things play out, and there's no accountability for the United States.
We're seeing it every day.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the same thing is happening every day, and with U.S. support, U.S. money, U.S. bombs. Look, you know what upset me so much about what's happening in Palestine is being on the inside of the Haditha prosecutions. The lawyers on the case, I think, tried to do their damnedest to get a conviction. The lawyers don't make decisions on immunity. I know the lawyers; they're honorable professionals who worked very hard to try and get convictions, and then one after the other, they got the rug pulled out from under them as various people got immunity, right? But there was an effort to prosecute. There was an effort to discover the story. We, the U.S. Marine Corps, put people in cells pending the outcome of the trials. Not for this one, but for the Hamdaniya case, for example, the Camp Pendleton 8, who dragged a guy out from his house, tied him up, and executed him. Those Marines sat in prison cells, and the squad leader ultimately got convicted, and I think he got something like 16 years in jail. So at least we go through the process. I'm not defending what happened in Haditha. We don't have that type of commitment to the law applied by the United States to the Israeli conduct. I mean, the U.S. government is willing to prosecute its own service members sometimes, or at least go through the process, but has no problem with the Israelis committing crimes and nothing coming of it. And I think the American people should question that.
I mean, yeah, but we don't really even follow our own laws when it comes to Israel. There's been a lot of talk about the Leahy law about supplying arms to countries that are in violation or accused violation of human rights and IHL law. And we don't do that either. And I think we just accept out of hand whatever Israel says, even though we know, insiders know, that Israel is like an inveterate liar and not to trust them. But, we're going to keep towing the line, I suppose. So I think one of my huge concerns since this started was the state policy of, for instance, bombing hospitals, because I had just gotten back from my last tour in Afghanistan when the infamous 2015 Kunduz hospital bombing happened under Obama and of the MSF, Doctors Without Borders hospital. And that was a massive international incident. And now it's just another complete drop in the bucket. So I guess, what does this mean for international humanitarian law going forward and war crimes prosecutions in general, now that it seems to have been completely normalized and accepted since this began in October?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the United States has always taken the position that there is an international order that is governed by laws that we've all accepted. And, we try to adhere to them, or we put on a show of adhering to them, even if we don't sometimes do it. that myth has been shattered.
Mhm.
The Israeli war against the Gazans has completely undermined U.S. credibility when it comes to international law, international humanitarian law, and the rule of law in the world. It's not just people like you and me. I think the Generation Xers and younger understand that keenly because of the access they have to social media. Perhaps the older generations who are still being fed the industrial media information that the government wants them to have not been moved by it. But the myth has been shattered. There are countries that still believe in the rule of law. I don't think it's dead, but our credibility in the world as America, the land of law and order and human rights and civil rights, has been revealed to be nothing more than a myth. What does it mean going forward? Look, I love the clip you used in your last podcast of Kamala Harris's interview on CNN.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to ask yourself when the question is posed, and it's a simple question, right? Because the question was about Israel and Palestine, and she could have just come out and had a conversation. But the first thing she does is delivers a message to the wealthy donors, the Israeli donors, AIPAC, to say, I'm with you. My support for Israel is unquestionable, or whatever words she used. I'm committed to Israel's defense. I'm committed to funding Israel so it can defend itself. But that wasn't the question. Now, the call of the question is, what are you going to do about it, right? But she feels compelled to begin with that, to reassure the people that got her elected, not the voters, or she didn't get elected, but who she wants to elect her, not the voters, but the funders, the people who pay the big money to influence elections in our country, a foreign government or people funded by foreign governments. Okay, she reassures them that Israel comes first. And, we do that to our own detriment as America. We do that to our own detriment as Americans because those are not our values. At least those aren't the values we believe we have. And so when you have the Democrats, the Republicans, across the board, they disagree on everything, but they agree on one thing, and that is continuing to fund Israel. You got to ask, what is causing that? And the answer is simple. It's money. It's money influencing our politics. That's a long answer to a fairly short question, but we've sacrificed. We Americans, as the U.S. government, we've sacrificed our reputation for Israel in the world.
Mm-hmm. You could argue it was tenuous after the global war on terror and the final withdrawal from Afghanistan. But yes, now it's kind of inescapable. So I guess now that we're closer to the end of our time, what do you, as a legal expert, think like we can do, the average voting citizen, to kind of apply pressure and demand that actual law is followed? Or is it just downhill with no brakes, and that's kind of like an impossible task at this point?
No, I think I'm not negative. I think the type of advocacy you engage in on social media and others like you have brought the daily events of this war to our lives on a daily basis. And that's unlike any other war in history. That has never happened before. We are watching the war crimes being committed minute by minute. And make no mistake, although I said that the myth of law and order has been shattered, that's with respect to the United States. I think there is still a world order that wants to have a framework of law that governs how states deal with one another. And so I think the future is bright. Unfortunately, tens of thousands of people are dying to make sure that I think we ultimately live in a better world. But what we're experiencing is going to have an effect. It's going to have a meaningful effect going forward. I don't think Israel survives the next 5 years. I think it is, and this is from their own politicians and their own experts. You can't commit these types of crimes, lose this type of credibility, and continue to exist as the state of Israel that we knew before October 7. And so for those people that are committed to liberty and freedom and justice, I think continuing to do what we're doing, because it's slow, it's hard, but it's worth it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on, describing the Haditha massacre, which again reemerged last week, and giving your editorial opinion on what's going on in Gaza. And it seems like the ceasefire is actually like further away now than it has been in a long time.
Yeah. There is no ceasefire until Netanyahu. I'm convinced now that Netanyahu holds the keys to a ceasefire, and that's not going to happen until the U.S. forces him into it, or the Israeli public from inside, like we saw yesterday with the hundreds of thousands of demonstrators putting pressure. But there will not be a ceasefire until Netanyahu calls the ceasefire.
All right. Well, Haytham Faraj, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate your time.
Greg, I appreciate you and all the work you do. Thank you for having me.
All right. Good night. Okay, so there you have it. That is the nitty-gritty of the Haditha massacre, and it just goes to show you, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Literally, the story that the Marine Corps put out in 2005 was they hid an IED, they took enemy contact, and when they left, terrorists killed all the civilians. Wonder where I've heard that before recently. It's just looking at this conflict. Sorry to call it a conflict. It's the same old talking points. It takes a village. The Islamophobia is still there. The thought terminating cliches of terrorist are still there. And again, I'd like to point out that Al-Qaeda wasn't a presence in Iraq until we went in there and occupied it and overthrew the government. Maybe we should stop doing that. Yeah. So just wanted to get into that. It's just a very prescient, salient demonstration about how nothing has changed. Also, did you guys see the massive riots in Tel Aviv? 300 to 500,000 people shutting down the city this weekend. I don't think it's going to do anything. And remember, most of those people still support what's going on in Gaza. They just want the hostages back. That's all. So I don't think we should get too excited like, oh my God, they're changing. They're coming around. No, they're getting more hardened and more fascist. So they're kind of disintegrating right now, which is helpful for those who are anti-child mass child slaughter. So let's see what we got. Colin Powell covered up the My Lai massacre. Yeah, you have to. When you're running off freedom eagles and you're the world's greatest democracy and the West is good and the East is bad, and you don't want to be seen doing the same kind of massacres that you're accusing the communists of during the Cold War, yeah, you've got to cover it up. So Colin Powell definitely did cover that up. Okay, so was he the whistleblower who took the photos? No, he was the defense attorney for one of the Marines, the squad leader, who was charged with dereliction of duty. And again, remember, all the Marines who participated in the actual killing were granted immunity by Mattis and some other people, so they could not be prosecuted. So the only person who could be prosecuted, one of the only people who could be prosecuted, was someone who actually didn't shoot anybody. He just lost control of the squad, so he's given a slap on the wrist, dereliction of duty. That's all. And then a Marine not associated with the squad, apparently came in after and took all the pictures to document it because he felt like someone should know about the pictures. He showed it to his chain of command. His chain of command said, delete it. I don't think he deleted them because that's why we have them now. So those are just, I'm not an expert on this case. I just wanted to get into it because I think it definitely has value looking at what's happening right now. And this was a huge deal. Abu Ghraib was a huge deal because the photos got out. And now these photos got out, but it's kind of too late. It's 20 years later. Also, we've been seeing live stream genocide, and it hasn't really moved the needle right now. So Mr. Farage, who was just on, he seems kind of hopeful about what's going to happen, but it's also incredibly depressing as well. Okay. Here we go. Does anyone remember the Iraqi invasion? I mean, I wasn't. Wait, okay, no, you can do the strikes. I don't. I was like, what, 13? I was not worried about that. So, unfortunate because I wasn't Iraqi. So, didn't the strikes already stop today because the Israeli Supreme Court ruled them political and thus illegal? I've been paying attention to this case. So I'm not entirely sure, but someone in the comments section can get you up to date with that, I believe. What do we got? How was the DNC? Give us the details. Love the show. Oh, hey, thank you so much. The DNC was really chill. The Chicago police were given orders not to brutalize any protesters, so there wasn't really any violence. The organizers of the protests in DC wanted to not be rowdy or violent either. They were trying to do some messaging. I'm not sure how much I agree with it, but it's also not my city, so I wasn't just going to fly in there and just rabble rouse and do what the local organizers didn't want to do. So yeah, it just kind of petered out eventually. So I think the next big action, and if I have enough money, I'll go, is the 27th in New York City. That's when Netanyahu is coming to speak to the United Nations. And according to Veterans for Peace and About Face, who have the actual information, it's going to begin at 10 a.m. outside the UN in Manhattan. And then we'll go to like Doc Holidays like afterwards or something fun. But that's the next big one. So be looking out to that. I'm going to try to make it down for that one. What else you guys got? Do you think, okay, I think put advocacy and the student protesters have begun. The advocacy. Yes. When I'm up in New York, because I'm definitely going to New York one of these weeks. I don't know if it's going to be the Netanyahu one or if it's going to be the week before, maybe both. I'm going to go and cover briefly, make like a short explainer video about the student protests at Columbia University, my alma mater, which I never graduated from because I don't like classrooms. So yes, they've begun again. NYU has put in some absurd bylines into what you can and can't do. So Zionist, the term Zionist is a protected class now. So it's a political ideology. It's not a race. It's not a religion. It's not a disabled person or someone with long-term chronic illness. Those are usually, it's not gender. Those are usually protected classes. But no, anyone could, I don't know how they define it because anyone can be a Zionist. Most Zionists are Christians. So I don't really know what they're on about there. Yes, totally. Netanyahu is coming to the U.S. again. Does he need to do his laundry? Well, he's coming to the UN. I don't think they have the same protocols because apparently, if you guys aren't tracking, when you're a world leader and you stay as a guest at the White House, they'll do your laundry for you. Most world leaders don't have the White House staff do their laundry, but apparently Netanyahu brings extra bags so Americans can do his laundry because he's on one. He's on a massive evil power trip, and we don't like him around here. I I know the Palestinians also in the West Bank did a peaceful march protest with many kids and women, and over 200 of them were shot to death by snipers, including people in wheelchairs. Are you talking about the Great March of Return? So, yes, I remember there was a lot of sniper action and activity during that. It was just a protest, but they freaking opened up. All right, well, it looks like we're at the end of our questions. Okay, here's a good one. Now that we're go. So I listen to a lot. He's like, "Hey, Greg, what metal bands are you listening to lately? Seems like a great genre to get into after waking up to the state of the world." I don't know. I've been listening to a lot of thrash. Kind of been getting into punk, but here's what. Wait, I'm seeing like Nervosa, which is an all-woman kind of like black thrash metal band from Brazil. I'm seeing like Sisters of Mercy, which is kind of like proto goth rock. That they're coming to Austin. Some death metal like Frozen Soul and Gate Creeper is coming in later. These are kind of more obscure bands. I saw Pallbearer a few days ago. Yeah, so I don't know. Just listen to a whole bunch of stuff. I don't know if we're gonna spend airtime doing the whole metal conversation. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, the Great March of Return was not in the West Bank, though. Yeah. So, all right, guys. I think we don't seem to have any other questions for this evening. And yes, everybody loves the Sisters of Mercy. They're amazing, and I'm really excited. They're coming to Austin in like a few weeks, so super pumped for that. So thanks, guys, for listening. We just wanted to end on a kind of like sanity restoring note because, life does go on. If you're lucky enough to be born here or in other places that aren't being actively genocided by Western powers, and continue your activism, continue to be educated, and continue to apply pressure. This is going to take years and years and years. So, yeah, go to concerts, like listen to music, actually have a life, because it's the only way to maintain sane and keep advocating for people who can't advocate for themselves. So we're going to end a little early. So hopefully you guys have some more questions next Thursday. I'm not sure what the topic will be because the news cycle is so insane, but hope to see y'all then. And hope you have a good night. Cheers, y'all.